Hello, hello. This is Irene with Saugatalks today. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining because you can find Saugatalks on LinkedIn company page. You can connect to me directly. Irene Lyakovetsky, very long last name. You can find Saugatalks on YouTube, Saugatalks, and of course on Twitter. And I talk weekly to fascinating people in tech. We talk about tech trends, we talk about business trends because there's no business without tech these days. And we touch a number of topics from emerging technologies to established technologies to mature technologies, but in a way that companies, organizations adapt the technology is really different. And 2020 was quite a year. So we're stepping into 2021 and I'm bringing a topic that will be interest for broad audience. So to me, supply chain today, supply chain is, we depend on supply chain in everything we do in our lives. So today, my guest is Norman Katz. Hello, Norman. Welcome.
Hello, Irene. How are you?
Doing really well, doing really well. So Norman, thank you for being on Saugatalks. And we're going to talk about supply chain trends. The reason for that, Norman, is because you are a principal execution officer. That's how you call yourself?
That is one of the titles that I hold, yes.
It's inspiring. It's inspiring. So what I read beyond this beautiful, beautiful title is that you're a founder and you're principal at Katz.
That is correct. I owe that great name to my accountant of many decades now.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you are advising companies for more than 25 years. Congratulations on work anniversary, business anniversary rather.
Thank you.
You're advising to companies on supply chain performance, right? On optimization, I'm sure, operations.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about trends. So to me, I educated myself a little bit preparing for our talk, and amazing stats I saw is 94% of customers, if affected by 2020, by COVID, their supply chain, their logistics affected and impacted. But all the changes we saw happening around the world. So how do you comment that number, 94%? What does it mean?
Well, I think that people are going to be dissecting the causes for supply chain interruption due to COVID for a long time. And I think that, certainly there are a lot of, reasons for the supply chain interruptions. We can point to, the need in the United States for more people to drive trucks. That is one big reason for supply chain interruptions. Better forecasting needs is one reason for supply chain interruptions. Right now on the news, automakers are facing a big problem due to the lack of microchips because of the supply chain was shifted over to for chip manufacturers to gaming when the automotive sector went down. And so, but one aspect of supply chain in terms of company interruptions that I see is, and I've written about this before in my newsletters, is what I call the supply chain digital divide. Mm-hmm. And it is not just between companies that are, let's say, the haves and the have-nots, but also within companies themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, when we met on LinkedIn, you informed me that you enjoy talking to people, which I think is great. And I have the opportunity to just have conversations with a lot of people as well. So in 2020, I had 3 really, really insightful conversations with 3 different companies. And I want to tell you about you and your audience about these 3 insightful conversations. So one conversation was with a major grocery chain here in the United States, whose systems comprised of 3 legacy mainframe computers that did not talk to each other. And their supply chain was hampered by the fact that the company was supported by 3 legacy mainframe systems that did not talk to each other. So they had a lack of dynamicity in their supply chain because they have 3 mainframe systems that don't talk to each other. Another grocery chain does not use barcoding to receive goods into their warehouse. My goodness. I mean, so they do that all manually. Mm-hmm. And certainly that hampers their supply chain, capabilities from a throughput standpoint, from an accuracy standpoint, right? And another company is a media type company, and their order processing system is written in a 20-year-old dead software language.
That's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. A lot of
right. So as you can imagine, now internally within those companies, and they all have websites, mm-hmm. but internally within those companies, what kind of conversations must they be having with departments and people who would like to do more advanced things and get more analytics and more business intelligence and implement more advanced technologies, but can't, mm-hmm. Because they are hampered by old technology. So there is the supply chain digital divide within those companies. Aside from, I think, the supply chain digital divide that exists just across the expanse of all companies, let's say across the country, small companies are just too small to embrace some of the more advanced technologies, and are lucky that they can just get their enterprise resource planning systems free of dirty data, let alone even think that they could use something like AI.
Yep, so you're describing the reality, and that makes a lot of sense, because many of the systems, especially in larger companies, have been written decades ago. 20 years is not that bad of a number, right? So we're talking about legacy. We're talking about legacy applications, programmers who, if we're lucky, they maintain that code from 50 years ago. If we're less lucky, right, they handed it off to someone else, and there are pieces of code, scary news there, right? Pieces of code that no one knows how it works, right? Mm-hmm. They were lucky to kind of go over year 2000. Remember those times, right? To keep operations going at the same time, right? The pressure from customers, from competitors, from pandemic challenges, right? You're basically gonna go out of business unless you're very digital this way, right? So where do you think this company is gonna make that leap in digital transformation, but basically becoming a modern enterprise? Mm-hmm.
Well, we know that those systems existed because the pandemic exposed the unemployment systems that are still running on legacy platforms and legacy code. But, I think that we tend to think of private enterprises as being, really more advanced. But shockingly, they are not. Mm-hmm. Right? So, now we come to, when do we think that companies are going to embrace, the panacea systems that are AI and ML and blockchain? And I don't want to be classified as negative Norman, right? When people look at this podcast and go, my goodness, this guy is a dinosaur and he's just poo-pooing all this technology, and we should never hire him because he just doesn't get it. I think these technologies have a tremendous potential to advance companies through breakthrough operational evolutions. I view technology as a tool to get a business process done, right? So, and I've got some notes here, so I'm going to refer to them. If we look at data analysis, kind of like the phases for data analysis are descriptive, where we look in hindsight, predictive, where we say what is likely to occur, but we have to look at that as like, what is the accuracy, right? Predictive analysis is, well, I think that something is likely to occur, but of course we want it to be with a really good amount of accuracy, right? I think that that's likely to occur, but I only think it's going to, the likelihood is 20%. Well, is that valuable or not, right? And then prescriptive analytics tells us what we should do. And again, we want it to be really, really accurate, because if software is going to tell us what to do, we want it to be spot on good, right? So the ability to get there, especially for something like procurement, would be great, right? I mean, traditionally we've relied on min-max, but if we can narrow this down and involve good forecasts and whatnot, and kind of predict consumer behavior, I mean, the potential for this is just terrific. But companies are struggling to get master data management smooth, not just internally between departments, but externally between themselves and their customers, and between themselves
partners,
and their downstream suppliers.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, what makes us think that we could just put AI, and then ML on top of that? Because, I refer back to the fact that, that's why HAL 9000 went cuckoo bananas in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Right? The foundational technology, the foundational data has got to be basically perfect.
Yep, garbage in, garbage out. That industry, of course, talk. Yeah.
Right. So, from a supply chain trend standpoint, mm-hmm. I think that, I almost see, the gap of the digital divide, somewhat growing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it's growing. Interesting.
Right. I almost don't see that it's closing. I see somewhat, sometimes that, that it's growing. When I read articles about ERP EDI integration, where companies see, where companies were like, wow, this is so revolutionary. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, I was doing that back in 1993 when I started with supply chain vendor compliance. It's like, this shouldn't be this should not be a revelation. This is a necessity when you get to the point to where you're keying in too many orders into your ERP system. But I think companies today are still like, wow, we've invented, the wheel or the light bulb. Those things have been around for a while. This should just be part of your plan. Right? Integrate.
Working with EDI technology, mid-90s, an insurance company, when we were enrolling members, EDI enroll log, that was the Oracle table name okay, that we've created, over the old COBOL system. So point is absolutely nothing innovative in India in EDI, and yet.
Yeah, I mean, look, ANSI X12 EDI is still the supply chain standard. I mean, so that there's nothing, I mean, inherently wrong with it. That it is what it is. At least we're not using dial-up modems anymore, right?
Thanks to that. Yes, thanks to that. Norman, let me ask you this. When you see this situation in companies, right, with your experience, of course, your hands-on experience with all the clients, what's your first step to advise to management, to employees? What's your advice on where to start on that transformation? Because again, people know that they're behind, right?
Right. The biggest problem that I see is one of complacency. And, executive management and quite frankly, entrenched management, right? They don't have to be the executives on the top, but they might be comfortable in the middle. And they are
things this way, right? It's basically, we know,
right.
Humans,
they're protecting their domains. They might have, they're comfortable in what they're doing. They're comfortable in the jobs that they're doing. And, unfortunately, pride in politics.
Sure. Nothing new. We're human.
Right?
Absolutely.
Supersedes.
In 2020, that status quo was shaking to the ground. And I spoke with a lot of my guests here on digital transformation. And they told me 2030 came to us in 2020. So those who were too comfortable, okay, they pushed to change that status. Do you see this happening with your clients? How did it accelerate that change?
Well, let's talk about supply chain. Let's talk about digital supply chain and that term. Look, again, I started with supply chain vendor compliance back in 1993. My first barcode project was in 1991. Right? Those are, to me, supply chain digital technologies. Right? So, the supply chain digital transformation, if we consider that those are supply chain digital technologies in going from paper to digital data, happened over a quarter century ago. Right? So, I think that we have to stop thinking that the supply chain digital transformation, is suddenly taking place today. No, it started like a quarter century ago, right?
It's not before,
Right, when companies started to integrate EDI and ERP, that was a supply chain digital transformation. When companies started to scan a barcode label on a box and know what was in there rather than using pen and paper and opening the box, that began a supply chain digital transformation. So, again, I think, from a perspective standpoint, we need to stop trying to reinvent, right? Blockchain is not starting the supply chain digital transformation. It might be altering, it might be advancing it, but if you're using EDI, you're already digital.
Okay, then companies we talked about, they are digital in the way, but what's the pressures right now that they're feeling? Because you think this divide is growing and that means part of the market just stays, right, with the operations they're comfortable with. That's fine too, right?
Right, so, if we were to consider companies by size, right? So I took a look at the North American Industry Classification System, which the Census Department uses to classify all companies. 88% of companies based on October 2020 data, are in the United States are less than $10 million a year in annual revenue, annual sales. So if you're a $10 million a year company, how likely is it that you are going to embrace AI and machine learning and blockchain?
That's a provocative question, and I like that because you implied the answer, but let me contradict you, okay?
Yeah, please.
It may not be a large operation, you're right. It may
Right.
not be huge volume of that data that needs to be analyzed and processed, okay? And of
Yeah.
course, finding recommendations based on that data may not be the best thing to do for the company like this. But at the same time, the entry level right now, technology entry point becoming so low and so cheap to get a sense of what technology can offer to companies who are small to medium size. Okay, that this is not an excuse anymore. It used to be 10 years ago, but with cloud services now, you can start very cheap, almost free, and you can find where the technology helps you to serve your customers, because maybe back end is still old way, but front end, if you are not predicting your customers' desires, if you're not delighting on front end, right? If your digital presence is not up to date, you're looking at big problems down the road, don't you think?
I understand that cloud services has brought prices down, but again, if you're a $10 million a year company, right? You're probably running on QuickBooks. Are you really thinking about, do I need AI, machine learning, and blockchain?
I'll give you that, but of course, thinking should not be, do I need AI? Question is, how do I serve better, right? What do I do that I haven't done before from business standpoint, of course.
Right. And so again, I'm not sure that 88% of the companies that are up to $10 million a year in annual sales, right? Unless somebody can come out with a product that solves a business problem for a $10 million a year company. There are 35,000 companies that are $100 million a year and higher in annual sales. So we can think that, and granted, the three companies that I talked about earlier are in that range. So you would like to think that companies that are over $100 million have their act together, but that's not necessarily true, right? Because they're running on legacy systems and I think legacy thought processes that first have to get resolved and replaced before they can even think about, putting in something like AI, machine learning, and blockchain to really help with their internal technologies and processes, and to help with their supply chains. The middle of the road pack of 185,000 companies sits in the 10 million to 99.9 million range. And again, I think on the low end, you've got companies, at least in my experience, that are still struggling with acting like a company. On the upper end of that range, I think that you have companies that are willing to be at least, users and adopters, not necessarily developers.
That's fine. Absolutely. They have their own business, pain points to address. Absolutely.
Right. So, but if we were to take a look at a pie chart, of these companies, right, and look at the percentages, it's a relatively small percentage of companies that I think would actually be, integrators of
Mhm.
this advanced technology, right? Again, if your foundational data is not good, layering advanced technology on top is actually going to be more disruptive and destructive to your organization.
Absolutely. You know what? And this is the biggest barrier. This is legacy cultural barrier to any new technology adoption. Exactly. I'm glad
Right.
you're pointing this out. And I'm glad how you call it digital device, because that device needs to be addressed. Otherwise, again, company going out of business, company losing people, company losing jobs. And in my previous talk with AI executive and strategy expert, MTS Adam, he pointed out that companies who are up to date, who are more digital, who are more advanced, they actually adding jobs these days. And those laggers who are behind, they have to cut. They have to cut their people because, right, because operations not able to survive in these challenges. So where is this light in your point? Yeah, at the end of that tunnel, what can we do? Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that part of this, part of this, it is incumbent upon the advanced technology companies to make sure that they are not selling a technology, but to make sure that they're selling not just their solution, but the end-to-end solution,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? You know, they have to be able to sell their solution by ensuring that their clients can evolve into it.
Exactly, and participate, right, to become part of that digital economy, right? Because
Right, right. So, you, you know, behind me, I have my 3 books, and my third book, which came out in November of last year, is a fusion between my 30 years, my over 30 years of professional experience and a personal passion of mine, which is I've been fencing since 1993 and coaching in my own little club since 2007. So when I coach a new fencer, child or adult, right? You know, doesn't matter. I always start with footwork first. I don't start with weapon work. Now, I will tell you that footwork is more boring, right? Because everybody wants to wail around the sword, right? That's
look good while doing
good.
that,
Oh,
right?
that's
Foundation.
much more cool.
Yep.
Oh yeah. You know, when you watch a movie or you watch a TV show or something like that, and you see 2 sword fighters going at it or 2 people with lightsabers, you're not watching their footwork. You're watching the action, right? Right.
Beautifully staged, right? Which is
Yes.
all. Yep.
Yes. But the footwork is critical and it's foundational. If you don't have balance, stability, poise, and great footwork that you can use for speed, tempo, again, center of gravity, balance, the ability to control your distance. And I use distance offensively and defensively in fencing. If you don't have your footwork, all the weapon work in the world is not going to help you. So applying that to technology, if your foundational systems are not functioning spot on, and the foundational business system for companies is the enterprise resource planning system and the data held within it. That is the business system of record. It is the software system that allows you to account for what is operationally happening. Right? It is the system that is 2 halves of a whole. Right? You know, I don't like it when accountants call it the accounting system, because technically I don't need the accounting side to operate my business. And for the accountants that are watching this podcast, and their hearts have just stopped, they can defibrillate themselves now. But what I'm saying is actually correct. The ERP system accounts for what is operationally going on. Yes, I need both parts, but it is the business system of record, and that is the system at the core where all other information is going to be, realistically extracted.
Preaching to the choir, I have business process management background and operational excellence background. So now we call it intelligent automation, but by automation meaning absolutely streamlining your basic processes first, finding the ways to optimize your very boring, very manual operations before you reach for further like shiny toy and say that.
The EDI system integrates to the ERP. Your inventory warehouse management system, right? No matter how simple or how advanced, integrates to ERP. So with those three technologies, I have everything that I need for supply chain, just right there.
Exactly. So, it's not very sexy though, right? It's not your beautiful shiny embellishments, right? But this is bread and butter of your business, and that's where you advise to start, right? Yeah, makes sense.
Well, again, I mean, I've been involved in supply chain vendor compliance since 1993. What do I need to compete? I need an ERP system, something. I need EDI, and I need to put barcode labels on my products and my boxes.
That's a start. That's a solid start, right?
You know what? If I can do those things, I'm in the game. So the science behind those technologies has improved greatly. We use laser scanners today, not charge-coupled devices. Again, we don't use dial-up modems where we're doing everything over the internet. ERP functionality has, features and functionality have improved greatly. But, those three technologies from essentially the 1970s, late 70s, maybe early 80s, right, are what runs supply chains today. And so if if a company can't get those three things correct, AI, machine learning, and blockchain are not going to magically save you. Those technologies are enhancements to the foundational tech. I mean, if you can't get EDI right without manual intervention, don't try blockchain, because there's no manual intervention there, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So with this, Norman, this conversation is enormously interesting to me. All right. So I do want to send our audiences to reach out to you, from this video when they watch it. We'll provide all the contact information, because with your absolutely precious experience in the industry, in helping companies to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, when I help companies focus on honing down, implementing, whether it's selecting, implementing, honing down these three technologies, improving their performance with their, whether it's upstream or downstream supply chain, the next step would be, okay, what can we do next?
Exactly. And this is fabulous, because again, people get excited when you see this, storage room robot, okay, working and doing miracles, when you see all these boxes that people don't have to spend entire day counting and recording and making sure and double checking, all this. So we will welcome robotics, we'll welcome automation, right? But for that, as you said, business leaders have to realize that your work starts at groundwork, at your footwork.
You know, there is so much non-value added activity that goes on within companies that, you know, that is just, one, it's sucking the life out of employees, you know, I mean, and it is holding companies back from being, you know, better, more competitive, more creative than what they are today. And, you know, I have written about this. You know, we live in a commoditized world, and execution now is everything. So, you know, when you're muddling around in the muck because your foundational technologies are not honed down and working together, you're really missing a lot of executional opportunities, whether it's to provide better customer service or work in innovating better with your suppliers, or to try to come up with a new product or service, you know, that separates you from your competitors. And so, you know, it's not just about technology for technology's sake. It is not just about you know, getting data right for, you know, for data's sake. It is about making the enterprise better from an executional standpoint, end to end.
Streamlining, right? Your operations, we say sometimes, right? So
Right.
Norman, thank you so very much for this talk today. What's the key takeaways we want to leave our audience with? Like 3 key points. I learned about footwork. That's
Yes. Well, you know, right. I think one is, you know, I mean, it's probably, you know, sage old advice, but, you know, you have to build the foundation first. In, you know, in fencing, you've got to have great footwork. You know, from an enterprise standpoint, your foundational systems have got to be, you know, smooth running, you know, great data before you even think about, you know, getting some more advanced, you know, software, you know, whether it's business intelligence or using some other advanced software. You know, it is, and I think the other takeaway is that it's not just about technology for technology's sake. It is about business performance and execution, and in a commoditized world, out executing your competitor.
perfect.
Right? And I think that the other takeaway is that you don't have to create these technologies to selectively use them for your own benefit. That, you know, as you said, as you know, as the costs are coming down, that these technologies will be more achievable, right? But they're not a panacea unless you really have a well-functioning enterprise with which to use them in.
Absolutely. You have to do your homework, right? Is this the message? Is this the message? That
You have to do your homework, and you've got to do your internal work to make sure that you don't recreate, you know, the HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where, you know, you create software that just goes cuckoo bananas.
Fantastic, fantastic. So if any operation audiences out there, right, people are in charge of supply chain or parts of it, you know, even tasks or projects for their companies, okay, there are methodologies now where to start, how to overcome these barriers, right, this technology, this culture these organizational, these political barriers, right, inside your company, there are ways. And of course, Norman, with his experience, the experts who've been through this, right, can help over there. Norman, thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you for educating all of us on what hurdles are. But yep, the future is bright, don't you think?
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Irene. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you.